all right. Everybody having fun at MAGFest? They couldn't hear you next door. Let's try that again. Everybody having fun at MAGFest? That's better, that's better. Gonna give it one more minute here for a last straggler or two to find their seats. Or the total lack of stragglers, take your pick. Okay, my name is Bruce Nesmith. You can see by the fancy Nancy slide up there. I'm the lead designer for the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Once upon a time, that game is now, 12 years old? Getting very long in the tooth. I'm also a novelist, author of Mischief Maker, Odin's Escape, and Ymir's Return. So if any of you like fantasy novels based in mythology, check them out. I'd really appreciate it. You'll have to excuse me today. I've got a little bit of a cold, so you might be able to hear some of the roughness in my voice. If I start hacking up a lung, I might reach desperately for my drink here. Also, I feel really awkward sitting behind a table as one person. If it was a panel, it would be different. So I'm going to do mostly standing, and I might find myself pacing. So if you can't hear me in back because I end up start doing some of this, just wave your hands in the back, and I'll remember to bring the microphone back to my face. So today we're going to talk about a principle in video game design called failing faster. And it feels like it's sort of an oxymoron there. Why would I want to fail? But it turns out it's something that's very important and critical in any kind of development, but particularly in video game development. But almost any kind of programming also involves it, and many other disciplines as well. The reason that you would want to fail fast is not because failure is good. Intrinsically, failure is bad. Success is good. But the problem is we cannot guarantee success just because we decide we're going to succeed. As human beings in all our endeavors, we end up failing as often or more often than we do succeeding. So the idea is we fail fast so that we can succeed sooner. So the goal is success, even though we are acknowledging our failures. So let's talk a bit about what failure means. Failure is a part of learning. I have a fun little video here of some poor young soul crashing his bike over and over and over again. That'll happen about 40 times before I finish making this one point. So, if you don't fail, you don't learn. That's not quite true. You learn from success. But it turns out that as humans, we learn much better and much quicker from our failures. That young man is going to learn not to go off that curb much faster than if his mom just told him not to, because the scars will keep him up at night. So, failure can be progress, and usually is progress, but you have to learn from it. And that's really key. Like I said at the outset, failure itself is not a good thing. It's what it does for us. It's that it helps us to learn. The learning is what we're looking for, not the failure. I don't want that kid to fall off his bike. I'd much rather he realize on his own that going down the curb is not the right thing to do. But if he does, he needs to learn from it. If he just continues to ride down the curb, he's going to continue to fail and nothing will have been accomplished. We look at the word failure, and it does feel like a very negative word. You know, I want to fail. Well, no, you don't really. You want to succeed. You're just using failure as a gateway to get to that. So what we're really going to do here is change the word failure. And I have a little clip here from Adam Savage. Everybody remember Adam Savage? It's been a while since he's been in the public eye. Okay. Let's see if I can get this to play. Hello, hello. Adam, are you there? Nope, Adam is not there. Why is Adam not there? Oh, this is failing slow, trust me. I have no idea what the heck is even going on here. Bear with me for just a moment. I thought I had embedded these videos, but it looks like maybe I didn't. That's okay. I can talk my way through all of it. I don't know what the hell is going on here. I'm going to kill that, restart it, because that is always the best way to do everything, isn't it? No, of course I don't want to save that. That's a fail. Where's the F5? There it is. Why is that not going? So one video played, but the other video does not want to play. Why does the other video not want to play? Okay, so I'm going to summarize what the brilliant Adam Savage would say. And basically, what we're talking about when we're talking about failing fast is not truly failing. We're talking about iteration. And when we iterate, we do something over and over, looking to make improvements with each step of it so that we can end up succeeding, so that we can learn from each iteration. But when you look at the individual pieces of it, you start off with a failure, and then you make an adjustment, and then you fail again, and you make another adjustment. This is iteration. How many people out here are involved in software development in any capacity? How many of you have written a piece of code that was perfect the first time? You are all liars. Every one of you with a hand up is a liar. Unless it was hello world, you did not write anything that was perfect the first time. So, software development is rife with failures. Just typing the line of code itself, you exhibit failure because you inevitably get a word or a number incorrectly and you have to hit that backspace. So these days, I'm mostly a novelist. I rarely write a sentence that I don't have to hit the backspace at least once on, let alone look at it and decide that was really stupid and change an entire word. That's iteration. That is successful iteration. It's happening extremely rapidly. And that is the goal. You want to get the failures out of the way. You want them off your plate so that you can get to the success. And that happens through iteration. So we want to promote iteration. Goodbye, Adam. Okay, so let's look a little bit at life cycle. I come from a background of video game design. I am by training and nature a systems designer. I also do a lot of other story and quest related stuff, but system design is really where I'm at. So I've kind of got one toe dipped in the programmer world. And in fact, my original entry into video game design was as a programmer. But then I saw the light, sorry programmers, and decided to be a designer. So, you know, have you looked at me real hard? I mean, no one is perfect. And that actually goes to the fail faster theme. No game is ever born complete. So I work on extremely large games, but this is true for all games, even if you go down to the level of something like Tetris, okay? The idea that you have for the game is incomplete. It isn't born with all its features there. Skyrim certainly wasn't born with everything completely in the original design doc is what got shipped. An entire team iterated on it. We failed continuously, striving for little successes and building one little success upon another little success until we said, we've got enough success, we can ship this darn thing. So the game starts off as an idea, usually a flawed idea, but it's got great potential. So it's like, oh, there's this key thing that's really, really cool, but there's all kinds of problems between that idea and the ultimate execution of it. So it's going to go through a life cycle of development. And for those of you who are in software development, some of this is going to be redundant, but hey, it's a part of the speech. So, software development life cycles. I've got 7 of them up there. You guys could probably come up with more. You could probably argue over some of the terminology because the slide might be a little bit dated from that. But basically, there's a lot of different approaches to how to develop software. Some of them are older, some of them are newer, some of them have been proven to be not as successful, some of them have proven to be more successful. So, this is the oldest one. It's not necessarily the most successful, but it makes a good counterpoint to make my point about failing faster. So, waterfall, the idea of this, well, excuse me, back up here. This is the original product life cycle, and it's the least suitable for iteration. The whole idea of it is born out of something more akin to building a house than to building something like software. When you are building a house, you can't fail faster in the same way as you can developing code. Nobody starts pouring the concrete for the basement and say, ooh, that's wrong, let's rip that out. And do that 5 times before you start putting up the walls, decide they're wrong and rip that out. You need to get it right the first time. You need to plan to a meticulous level that we cannot afford to do in video game design or in software design. And this is a picture of a very famous waterfall, just because it looked fun. So, your game is going to move through stages in waterfall: concept, requirements, overall design, detailed design, coding, and testing. Those are not necessarily every last one, but that's a pretty good set of stages. But the idea of waterfall is that you cannot move to the next stage until you have completed the previous one. So until the requirements are completely done, we cannot move to overall design. And the overall design has to be completely done before we can go to detailed design. No coding is happening here. This is horrible for software development. Like I said, it's born more from other industries where they couldn't afford to do the iterative process in the same way that software can. So if a problem is found, you may have to go all the way back to the beginning. Your concept may have been flawed, but you don't find out about it until you're in testing. This translates to, let's say the games that I work on, a 4-year project, we're 3.5 years in, and we're in the middle of testing, and we find that a core concept principle is just plain wrong. If we were following this development, we would have to throw everything out and start from scratch. Well, clearly that's not going to happen. That's never going to happen. That's just not how software is made. So, the thing that has to be acknowledged is that mistakes are inevitable. And this can be a challenge for management too. Management doesn't like mistakes. They see mistakes using the old school word of failure rather than of iteration. So they've got to be on board that it's okay to make mistakes. And most modern software development managers these days are. But there was a time, let me tell you. I have a few years on most of you out here. I've programmed in COBOL, and those were the days when that wasn't acceptable. And I see a head nod here or there, yeah. We can share horror stories of COBOL at some point. So, evolutionary is much more modern. No, it's not the same as Agile or some of the other stuff, but it's a lot easier for me to talk about up here. So it is a distinct improvement over the waterfall. So, in the evolutionary, and I apologize for the small print, this is a very large room, is that you break your project into smaller pieces and you evolve them. Just a fancy word for iteration in this case. So you want to develop your abstract specification, build a prototype. That is key. You're building a prototype, and then you're testing it, and then you refine the prototype. And you continue to do that, and eventually that prototype ceases to become a prototype and becomes the real deal, and you continue to iterate on it. And you do this with small, discrete pieces of the process. So let's take video game design. One small piece of the process that's easy to talk about might be one of the mini games. So we could take, say, the lockpicking mini game in Skyrim. Okay, that is a very easy, discrete, lots of high walls around it thing that we can break out. starts off as a concept, we put it on a piece of paper, we play around with it a little bit, we write up a design doc, we have other people look at it, and then we start putting in some very primitive code, and it just keeps iterating, and you end up putting more and more stuff in, evolving it, evolutionary, through the iterative process. So this gets you to iterating, and not the fastest, I'm going to retract that. You're going to faster, let's say it that way. It focuses on prototypes, and this is key. You really need to be thinking about prototypes. The more work you can do before you're committing to code that is finalized, the better off you're going to be. Because you don't want to waste your time writing an elaborate piece of code only to find out there's a critical flaw you could have found earlier before you went to the expensive and difficult part of writing the code for it. It's open-ended, which means that you can decide when you're done. Anybody here who's written any significant amount of code knows it's never really done. It's never really perfect. It just gets kind of close, and then you say, okay, that's done. I'm going to turn that in. So that's actually an advantage from a scheduling point of view. Now, you want to be able to have a line at which you say, yeah, this isn't done. I don't care that the deadline's here. It ain't done yet. But beyond that, you have some flexibility. This is a risk that, while not unique to video game design, is rampant in video game design. You run the risk of not being done. There's always something better you can do to this little bit. I can always make the lockpick minigame a little bit better. I could iterate on it forever. At some point, you need to say, enough is enough. I've got to stop. There's other things that have to be done here. And that is the risk that iteration runs, and one that everybody who's working in these systems needs to keep in their mind. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to fail on ideas, or iterate on ideas, okay? But fail sounds so much cooler, doesn't it? Gives you all the heebie-jeebies as you try to think about failing on something. So this is where it's safest to fail, because all I'm spending is breath. Hey, I got this great idea for a mini game. They actually have to bring a real key, and okay, let's flush that idea. That took 4 seconds. Nobody had to code anything. No electricity was spent. No storage space on a hard drive was wasted. Boom, bad idea, failed. Let's move on. When you have these ideas, you need to talk them out with others. This is something else that is an intrinsic part of large-scale iterative process of the kind that I was involved in. You really aren't going to be able to do it alone. You're going to have to get other eyes on it before it gets to beta testing. That is, it's got to happen way before that. So when you have an idea, you got to give it to somebody. And then you have to listen to them. And you have to run this balance where you defend your ideas, but you listen with an open mind. So your idea had validity simply because you came up with it. That doesn't mean it's perfect, but there's some merit to it, or you wouldn't have come up with it. So you have to identify that. And then you have to listen with an open mind as other people say, that idea sucks. Well, they shouldn't say it sucks, but somebody's going to be stupid enough to say it sucks. They should be saying, you know, we could make that idea better, but not everybody's evolved enough. They haven't iterated on themselves to get to that point. So, if somebody thinks it's not good, it probably isn't, even if you think it's great. Now, that may sound like a horrible thing. You get 10 people in a room, 9 people think your idea is wonderful, 1 thinks it isn't. But you have to give that person their due. They probably have a point. It may not be a valid point in this circumstance, but they probably have a point. And you need to try to ferret out, what is it about this that they are right about, even if they're the 1 out of 10. So, when you throw out an idea or change an idea, you are iterating or failing faster. I'm going to come back to that if they think it's good or not. Right now. So, everybody here know Neil Gaiman? God, I hope so. Every hand in this place should go up. Those of you who don't, get out of here. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, this is one of his favorite sayings, and I've adopted it. It's one of my favorite sayings. When people tell you something is wrong or doesn't work for them, they're almost always right. When they tell you exactly what they think is wrong and how to fix it, they're almost always wrong. Human beings are great bullshit detectors. We see a concept, an image, we hear something, it's like, okay, something's not right there. That little key piece that they just said is invaluable information. They recognize something's wrong. They might not be able to tell you exactly what it is, but the fact it doesn't harmonize with them, that's something to pay attention to. But how to solve it, or the analysis of what is wrong, they don't necessarily own that. Maybe they do. Maybe they've got a brilliant observation about exactly what's there. But it isn't taking for granted that simply because somebody observes something has a flaw, that they also have the solution. You have to separate those two. You can't jam them together and say, well, this person said it was bad, therefore why they say it was bad is also wrong. Or how they say we should fix it is right, or therefore how they say we should fix it is also right. Those are two completely separate things. So, let me give you some examples from Skyrim. At one point, Todd Howard actually said to me, what if the entire main quest was a Radiant story? Now, not everybody here may know about Radiant stories, but basically it's how to generate a quest on the fly. It's a very complex procedural thing, and we were really excited about it. It was actually kind of a new way to do procedural content that had not been implemented in video game design before. And we were really excited. And we were so pumped about it, Todd went too far. He acknowledged that, probably about an hour later after saying this. And then I said something equally as stupid. Took me a little longer than an hour to backtrack on that one. Basically, simply because Radiant quests and the Radiant story system is so wonderful, doesn't mean it applies to everything. That was the failure that we made in the analysis. And it took saying those things out loud to other people. I mean, Todd Howard's the director of the studio. If he says, no, we're doing this, we're doing this. But he said that line, other people looked at him and went, and he acknowledged that simply by having that reaction, there was something that needed to be looked at harder. And then very shortly after, it's like, okay, yeah, you're right, that's a really dumb idea. Let's not do that. So those were terrible ideas, both of them, mine and Todd's. And when others pointed out how bad they were and why, we abandoned them. Now this is a case where the why was pretty obvious. It wasn't something subtle that had to be teased out because somebody had a feeling and you had to figure out what they were talking about. So, for video game design, and maybe for other software as well, let's talk about paper stuff. So, and for this discussion, virtual documents count as paper. So I'm talking about documenting in general. The document isn't the product. This is the mistake I have personally made in trying to document every last little thing about a process or an entire game. And I created a document that was totally unwieldy, of no use to anyone, not even myself. So, documents are to communicate with others. Got 150 people on a team. That's a lot of people. If somebody needs to look something up, they need to go look at the documentation. But if you spend all your time documenting, you're starting to think like the document is the product. The document is not the product. The other beauty of paper is you can physically make the game out of paper pieces. This is something I've personally done. Did it with the Oblivion speech contest, persuasion minigame. You actually cut out little pieces of paper and write on them and move them around on the table in front of you. You spend a half an hour doing that, and you saved some programmer 3 days. Okay? Because you found the solutions, in this case I found the solutions, to problems that became apparent the minute I started simulating things with these little pieces of paper. So I'm a big fan of paper models. I think paper models make a lot of sense, particularly for little discrete systems. Now, paper is not the only way you can make these cheater models. There's a dozen different ways out there, but this is the way I happen to use for one of mine. And then when you change the paper design, you're failing faster. And here's a look at the Oblivion persuasion minigame. There's a funny story about this. That art is up in the upper left-hand corner. I joined the Oblivion team shortly after the game had gotten started. That art had already been made. Classic failure of failing faster in iteration. They made the art too soon. And the minigame was broken. It didn't work in a big way. So, I'm trying to decide if I should harmonize with them next door. So Todd gave me a challenge. He said, I want to keep this art. I like the look of it. We don't have the time and the resources to redo it. Make me a brand new minigame that uses that art. So for those of you who are old enough or weird enough to have remembered the persuasion minigame in Oblivion, that's my fault. Okay? But in my defense, that's what I was told to do. There's a limit to what you can do with those resources. I have a new favorite person in the audience. So, I made the game with pieces of paper, and I took an old, I'm going to say egg timer, but it wasn't really an egg timer. It was a timer from some little game like Yahtzee or something. And I dragged Todd into a conference room, and I laid those pieces of paper out, and I explained it, and I flipped the timer over, and I said, do it. And he went, oh, whoa, wait. And by the time he was done, he was like, okay, that will work. Paper design, I spent maybe a day on it. And we shipped it pretty darn close to how it came out in that paper design. That was a big success for fail faster iteration, because we succeeded at a stage that had minimal resource costs. Just my time and some pieces of paper, scissors, and pen. Let's see if this video will play. Apparently I did not learn from the last failure. Yeah, it's failing. So that video, which will not be as easy to talk through, but I'll do my best. That video is showing a couple of people who work at a university doing game design courses, and they were talking about how they use paper designs to make things. And they went through a rather long-winded explanation of some ping pong game that they were making, and they showed how they could lay pieces of paper out to do it. And then they actually went and got themselves a ping pong table, and they tried some variations. I mean, they're kind of steering towards a Pong ripoff here. And they just tried playing it that way with some variations. So they showed that you can use an active model as well. And then they showed some cool prototyping where they were able to use some shelfware in order to try and simulate some of the basic activities they wanted. And this allowed them to iterate quickly before having to get too many other resources, aka people, involved in creating this particular little Pong ripoff game. I'm going to have lots of time left to answer questions. Doesn't that just suck? Okay. Oh, yeah. Confession time. I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics. So I'm a math guy, okay? Systems design, I'm sure you're shocked, right? So me and spreadsheets, my eyes kind of start to glow when you start talking about spreadsheets. I love me some spreadsheets. So spreadsheets are great for simulating certain aspects of system design. And all the programmers I have worked with, they love when I give them a spreadsheet, because it's already half-coded. They just have to look at the formulas in the spreadsheet. And then they can play around with things and come back to me and say, you didn't take care of this. What do you want to do about it? And I can fix the spreadsheet and get it back to them. And it's a really great communication tool because it's got one foot strongly in the sphere that they have to work in. And for me, as a systems designer, spreadsheets allow me to play what-if games. Some of the most important games in system design, video game design, that you can play. I can tweak some things and see what happens in my little simulation without having to have someone write expensive code. And I like to use charts and visuals. Now, this is what I've been accused of, properly so. Just as I said, the documentation is not the product, is not the game. This spreadsheet is not the game either. And sometimes those of us who love our spreadsheets can get a little caught up in them, and you start putting a little too much effort into them, and you start believing in your heart, even if your head hasn't caught up yet, that this spreadsheet is the game. The spreadsheet is not the game. The game is the game. So, spreadsheets allow for rapid changes of complex systems, which is a form of failing faster or iteration. Me playing around with spreadsheets for a week, I can create a system that functions when it gets coded with a much higher degree of success, with far fewer bugs, with much less having to go back to programmers and say, you know, that thing we thought we were doing, it's not going to work so well, than if I just gave them something in Microsoft Word that was just a description of it. So, this is an example of one piece of one spreadsheet. If you can see all the tabs down there, you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff. This is probably about a 1/15 of the actual sheet involved. So, some of the processes I go through, I have a block up at the top that contains all my constants and all my input values. I then use that to build tables of data, which I then express as charts. And then I can play around with various inputs. I can play around with various constants. I can see how that changes the relationship between things. This is how the combat formulas in Skyrim, Fallout 3, Fallout 4 were all done. This is how the character systems and leveling up is handled in all of those games. These are how the monsters are balanced, at least first pass balance. Final balance is always done in the game because the game is the game, the spreadsheet's not the game. It becomes a really powerful tool. And some of the spreadsheets I made are just mammoth. Because we make big games. Smaller game, wouldn't need as big a spreadsheet. Okay, little side note on formulas because I'm a math guy. So when I make formulas, the idea is to make them flexible. This helps me to fail faster because I don't have to rewrite the entire formula. So there is no such thing as a constant in any formula I make for any game. Those of you who are programmers or math people, you know what I'm talking about, okay? Everything is a variable. Now some variables are different than other variables. Some variables are input variables, but all things that would be a constant, I make variables and they get pulled out of the code. They're in a separate standalone file so that I can change them without having to go back to the program and say, I need to fix this formula. Externalizing the constants. Where possible, I do not use bounded formulas. A little bit of a technical term here. But bounded formulas always have boundary conditions. The easiest way I can explain this is to look at something that's a percentage system. So when you're looking at, say, the chances that I will hit somebody with a weapon, when those numbers start to get up into the 90s, you start to see weird artifacts happen in your formulas and in the results. Same thing when it gets close to 0. That formula is bounded, and those boundary conditions are going to cause you trouble. The most notable one, which has happened in most of the TES games, is with armor class. So, you managed to avoid 50% of the damage. Cool, I upgrade my armor. Now you're avoiding 75% of damage. Oh, okay. Now you're avoiding 90% of the damage. Okay, life's starting to get difficult. I can't improve that much without breaking things. I don't have any room to work with. I've only got that 5% sliver at the top. I can't give you another +3 shield. So because that formula is bounded, it breaks when it gets close to that number. So instead you want unbounded formulas, which usually use relative values rather than absolute values. So, enough of the tech talk for people who aren't math geeks like me. And as always, you've got to be willing to scrap the whole thing. No matter how much you try to protect your formula and make it flexible, you're going to have to just dump the whole thing. Side note that something that's not up there, I'm very fond of putting in things like exponential constants and setting them to 1 or 0. So they're in the formula, but they're not doing anything until I turn them on, and that way I can also completely change the shape of a formula without having to go back to programming. So, when you're looking at your prototype, you do not want to be playtesting. You want to be playing. 2 different processes. Playing looks for fun. Playtesting looks for bugs. You're not at the bug stage yet. You're trying to play the game. So with your prototype, you're looking to see, does this feel like it would be fun? We can work out the detail kinks later, but I need to know right now the big picture stuff. Playing gets you that. Playtesting does not. Playtesting is critically important. This is just the wrong stage for it. So, this is an easy thing that just about everybody should be aware of. You use temp art first. You'll wait to put the art in until you can actually commit to it, at least when the art is relative to the processes. Many times the art's not relative to the process. What a wall looks like isn't really affecting any game system, so it's safe to make that early. When you're doing your prototypes, try more than one design. Even if you know you have your favorite, even if you have something you really like, force yourself to use more than one model. Because you'll learn something from the one you don't like that you might be able to use. Or it might surprise you. There might be something really good about that one you didn't like, and you end up using it all together. So make yourself look outside your comfort zone. That's the big lesson, because we're all going to have our comfort zones, things we say, I really like doing things this way. Anybody who knows the combat systems in the Elder Scrolls knows some of my foibles about the things I like, because those are all my formulas. And you need to get outside feedback. Your poor little human brain, my poor little human brain, is not capable of seeing everything. We have biases. Confirmation bias is a big thing everybody talks about. We have blind spots. You need outside feedback, and you need to listen to them. What you do about what you hear is another story, remember, but you have to listen to them. You have to give them their due and their respect. So, this is where you want to spend your time as a designer, is in my prototype. Whether my prototype is in a electronic form, like an online tool, whether it's in paper, whatever the form is, I want to be working my ass off here so that when we go to final, it's got the best chance of being a success. So, this is what Skyrim looked like for the first half of its production. Every quest happened in this room, or copies of this room, with that character renamed standing there. And you click on him and you talk to him, and then if you have to go get a sword, well, it's laying in the corner of that room. It's not in the bottom of a dungeon. It's just sitting right there on the floor next to him. You pick it up, you talk to him again. Maybe there's a second room because there's a second person you got to talk to, but usually just make a bigger room and put the two of them side by side. Because this prototyping finds things before somebody has to build out an entire play space. It finds all kinds of problems. So you spend a lot of time in this prototype stage. And this isn't paper design, this is actually in the game. But it's still prototype because it's missing as much detail as we could get away with. I don't even have a door back there. If I walked out there, I'd fall into the infinite void and the game would crash. Come on, baby, you can do it, you can do it. No, we can't, we are a failure. That was a slide with a little teeny video that just showed the process I've been talking about, where you iterate, you come up with a design, you implement a prototype, you test it, you find out the flaws, change them, iterate, and just circle back around. So, team communication. This is vital if you're going to build anything of any size or scope. Small stuff, you're still going to do better if you listen to other people, but you can get away with it if you have to. So you cannot fail faster if you are not listening. Listening to yourself, listening to others, listening to people you don't want to hear from. But you gotta listen. You cannot fail faster if you aren't willing to admit you might be wrong. When somebody gives me an idea, if I find myself going like this before they hit that period on the end of their sentence, I'm the one who's wrong. They need to express their opinion. I need to seriously consider it before I say they're fucking idiots. No. I need to seriously consider it because the mere fact they're saying it means there is value there. Maybe I can't figure out what the value is and we set it aside and it never goes anywhere, but it has to be considered. You've got to listen. And human being tip, if you're not going to listen to them, why on earth would they ever listen to you? When the shoe's on the other foot and you know something needs to be fixed about it and you bring that idea to them, if you shut them down or were harsh with them, what reason do they have to not hear you out? Or to hear you out, excuse me. So, and you cannot fail faster if you are worrying about who is to blame. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make more mistakes than you are going to make successes. The job I had before I worked at Bethesda Softworks, I worked for TSR. Anybody here know what TSR is? Yeah, thank you. Okay. I was hoping that still was in the collective consciousness somehow. And when we used to work on D&D products, one of the things we would do is for our creativity sessions, people would shout things out and we'd write them up on a board. And they'd be shouting things out fast and furious. That step alone saved everybody's ego. Because then when you start going back through it, nobody remembered whose idea was which. The blame game had its feet cut out from underneath it. So you knew which ones you put up there because you were awfully proud of them. But when I saw that thing up there, I was like, no, I don't think so. I couldn't remember who did it. There was like 50 things on that board. And so the blame game got trashed. You don't always have that luxury. But you can't go around blaming somebody for making mistakes when they are working hard and they are trying to get to the right path. You have to celebrate their successes and not worry about what it took them to get there. You can't fail faster unless you're willing to suggest a bad idea. I had to be willing to stand in front of my boss, the director of the Elder Scrolls line of games, and say, hey, what if the companion's quest line was all Radiant stories? I had to be willing to risk myself to do that because he can look at me and say, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. He didn't because he's smart enough to know that that's not how you approach things. But I have to be willing to say that bad idea, knowing it will be heard and knowing that I won't be blamed for having a bad idea, that everybody is going to throw out these bad ideas because that's how you get to the good ones. Yeah. How long you want to make him wait there for his treat? Oh, I did this in a horrible color for this screen. If it was easy, everybody would do it. Clearly, I didn't invent that phrase. That's been around for a long time. But this stuff is hard. All the stuff I'm talking about, this isn't easy. It's bruising on the ego. It takes dedication. It takes hours of effort. It takes being smart. It takes being diligent. It's not trivial. Respect the effort and put in the effort. And that is the end of my talk. And I am right on time. Yep. I told him when I'd end, and I'm within a minute of it, even without videos I didn't get to play. Okay, so we have time for some Q&A here. Who has a question? Yes, ma'am. I'm so sorry. No, I'm just kidding. Oh, it's exactly the same. A line of text in a book or a line of dialogue in a video game, it's not substantially different from a line of code when it comes to what we're talking about. You write that line, you probably fiddled with it for a little bit, and then somebody else has to read it and tell you, I didn't get it. And then you fix it, and then you iterate on it. Now, unfortunately, you don't have prototype stages you can go through. It's a little hard to prototype this stuff. But the idea of iteration, the idea of failing faster is get something written. Anybody here writing books, short stories, novels? Okay. How many times have you heard somebody tell you, just put something on the paper? Iteration. That's what they're talking about. You can't fix a blank page. You can fix a bad line of dialogue. So you got to get it on there. That's your prototype in this sort of parlance. And then you can start iterating on it with yourself, with others, and you can start looking at it. And we did that a ton in Skyrim for the quest dialogue. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Yes. You there with the hand still up with a black mask.
So this is more Skyrim related, and you might be the only person that can answer this on a technical level. There was a bug where...
Oh, I hate you already. Oh.
There was a bug.
Wait. Only one?
Why were chickens able to report me for crimes? Why is that a thing?
At its core, one of the things we did in Skyrim that we had not done in the previous games, and we insisted on this, I think it was this one. I might be telling you a lie, but let's assume I'm telling you the truth. All creatures used the same data set as NPCs. They didn't have their own object form, to use the technical term. So that meant that they were subject to some of the same rules. So unless you added the appropriate data to the chickens, they would report you for crimes. So, yes.
So you put out the Neil Gaiman quote about, if they just tell you you're wrong, they can explain why versus giving you a reason. But could you go into more detail of the process of actually investigating that reason and trying to understand what was wrong about this idea or this prototype?
Well, to do that, we'd probably need to have an example, but you need to listen carefully to the words the person is saying. So let's suppose we're talking about a lockpick minigame, and they say, I don't like this. I really had trouble getting the meter to be in the right spot. It just kept flicking back and forth. Okay. Does that mean the game design is broken? Does that mean that the coding prototype has issues? Does that mean that there's a fundamental concept thing here that's just too much to ask for of a mouse or game controller? So you have to start going through the detailed pieces, come up with the reasons why, and then you would end up having to decide, okay, what do I fix about that? Well, it's just a prototype issue. It just didn't have the right sensitivity. We can fix that with a mouse sensitivity modifier, and that'll fix it. Or, there's just no way to fix this. We need something completely different, and come up with something completely different. But all you can do is look at the specifics. That's where the rubber hits the road, unfortunately. Shocker, right? Yeah. Too much talking, not enough Coke. Let's go way in the back there. You, sir, in the black with your hand up.
What metrics do you use to decide how much jank is livable jank? What is good enough? For example, I was thinking of the free engine.
God, I wish there was a great answer to this question.
I was thinking of the free engine to see how state was trapped, and I saw that almost any place where state was needed to be trapped, it was invisibly using the quest framework.
That's art versus science. I will say something about the government thing you're talking about. They're still living in waterfall. They don't want to admit it, but they are. They want the entire design laid out before they'll let you put a line of code into an editor. And that's why it takes a year to get those things approved. They're not willing to fail at all, let alone fail faster. Now, obviously, I'm speaking in very broad terms. That doesn't apply universally to every government institution. But older, entrenched institutions tend to have that. Now, when is it good enough? Sometimes it's like, well, the deadline's here. Guess what? We're shipping that baby. We'll fix it in a patch later. Sometimes it's risk-reward. Well, you know, this is a really complex system. If we change it anymore, we are likely to introduce more problems. And sometimes it's, well, we sent it out there and played it, and only 15% of the people had issues with it. Okay, that's good enough because we got to move on and do other things. So it's art versus science. Yes, sir.
Part of my role in software engineering is to interview people to be a peer and say myself. And for the most part, I know generally the company I work in, everyone buys a lot of what we say, which is great. But ego is one of those things that gets in the way.
Oh, that devil ego.
Right. What would be a great maybe interview question or situation you could give to filter someone out?
I don't know if this applies, but it made me think of this. Todd Howard's favorite question to ask in an interview is, what's the most expensive mistake you've ever made? That's one of his favorite interview questions. He doesn't give a damn about the mistake. He cares about, are you willing to own up about it? Can you be okay with it, as opposed to being really nervous about having to say this? And what did you do about it once it came about? I don't know if that would get to what you're talking about. The answer to your question require probably some thought more than I have sitting up here at this table at the moment. But that's one of his favorite questions, so I'll give that to you for free. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So curious. In terms of like the paper approach with drawing out your prototypes and whatnot, I'm curious of how that transfers to the actual game design. Are you actually redrawing the entire map itself and drawing out different solutions to give to your engineer? I'd just be curious to hear about your process with that.
The smaller and tighter you can get. She's asking about how often and in what environments you do the paper prototype. Does that paraphrase your question properly? Okay. The smaller and tighter you can get, the better. That's why I use the example of the persuasion minigame. Very tight, very isolated. For things that are highly interconnected or are large in scope, paper prototypes do not work so well. Now you need to have some shelfware tool maybe, or do something in game in a smaller scope, like the test cell that I showed you. But that ability to break something off and work on it all by its little lonesome, that to me is the key. That's where the paper prototypes work well. I did not use a paper prototype for regular combat in any of the games I worked on. It's just too complex. There's too many other interconnected pieces going on. That was simulated in the spreadsheet, where I could look at things in large masses of data and see how things flowed with that. So that's the best advice I got on that.
A supplement to that. Did you ever get into a situation where you actually had to like draw out like decision mapping for your engineers based on that? Basically breaking down the cells of data and then still visualizing it.
I probably had to do it once, but I don't recall off the top of my head. One of the advantages of working at Bethesda Softworks is that the staff there have been with us for a very long time. Turnover is extremely low. So it's very easy to go up to, say, Steve, one of the guys I worked with a lot, who was a programmer, and say something, and he knew what I was talking about because we had history together. This is also where where electronic documentation can be a big advantage. You can describe things in more detail without having to stand in front of somebody and talk it through, and then they can make notes on it and send it back to you, and you iterate that way. Spreadsheets are also great for that because they actually show process. So it also helped that being a former programmer, I'll tell a little side story here. At one point, one of the programmers said, you know, I can't put an exponent in this formula for you because it will slow down the frame rate. Well, I've been a programmer. I'm a mathematician. I knew that was BS. The amount of stuff that's done in one frame, some little exponent's not going to change that a nickel. So I bet him he was wrong. He came back with a completely new process that didn't have anything, but it was an improvement on mine. Didn't have an exponent, but it was an improvement on what I had offered him. And that's what we ended up shipping. So having that experience and being able to talk their language has been one of the great boons to my career. What we got? Yes, sir, in the red and black.
When you're looking for feedback, and you're kind of like solo, where would you like go about to try and get that? Maybe more of a creative process.
I usually go get a gun and get someone on the street, put it to their head, and make them play my game. It's difficult. You got to hit up friends and family first. Take it to, this is probably an excessive example, take it to gatherings like this. If you've got gaming clubs or organizations that support the efforts that you're working in, show it to them. If you think there's issues, make sure you know what an NDA is. Usually it's not going to be a problem, but you got to know your own stuff. Anywhere you can. One step shy of putting a gun to somebody's head. Let's not do that, but do everything up to that. Yes, sir, you.
So, I'm a product manager. I used to work in SaaS products. Especially over to gaming, I found it really hard to even apply into shipping stuff to have users actually use it. And I'm curious, do you feel like you can get enough learnings from just 10 people on the street versus shipping something with a lot of customers?
No. It's a problem. One of the things that I did in Oblivion, for example, is I had a leveling bit of data that I applied to monsters. And as we played the game in the studio, we're talking 100 people, it worked just great. Well, it turns out I hadn't accounted for scalability. When you have a 5% chance that this will be the highest possible creature, and that one will be, and that one will be, and that one will be, you run into the classic problem of it's not what are the chances it'll happen, it's to how many people is it going to happen to. And that's where, we didn't have enough people and we weren't forward thinking enough. And this is also why the video games you play them and you see something that either doesn't work for you or you read it about it online and you say, how could they have done that? They couldn't see the whole picture. They didn't have a large enough sample size, which is what you're basically talking about, a sample size, of people playing it to be able to ferret out that problem. It isn't because they looked at it and went, who cares? No developer has ever done that. They care deeply, too much usually. But they didn't, they're human. They couldn't get to where they saw that particular problem. I think we're close. We got a couple more minutes, maybe 2 more questions. Yes, ma'am.
Almost all modern video games are multiple small systems working together to create the big picture. A lot of prototyping was how to test each individual small piece. How do you deal with once they're all put together in the pie and it's making a whole new thing by fixing all of these small pieces together?
Really big pieces of paper. No. You can't use paper prototypes for that anymore. Sometimes you can use the spreadsheets, sometimes you can't. Sometimes the interdependence is just too much. All you can do at that point is you have to be playing it in the game. There's just too many things going on, and you rely very, very heavily on the high quality of your playtest team because they're trained to go through permutation sets that hopefully find some of those things out, but it's a bear. And the problems that you are familiar with in some of the games I'm sure you love, they're relative to that. One more question here. Yes, sir.
Do you have an example? You talked a lot about iteration, dropping the whole process. Very personal question.
Well, we were trying to decide if we'd have a child. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not sure this totally fits, but it is a decent story, and it kind of fits, so I'll tell this one to you. When I first went back to Bethesda Softworks, and Todd was the director, he was my workmate the first time I was at the company. He asked me to do the Thieves Guild. So, in Oblivion, Thieves Guild, that's my fault. I apologize to any of you who hated it. Celebrate any of you who loved it. So I did, and I wrote this amazing backstory, and I had this whole plot laid out, and I went to go present it to him. And I laid out this amazing backstory, and he said, "Stop. I want to play that." And this doesn't totally fit in the iteration process, but it kind of is because I was making stuff. The big lesson I learned there is, from a story development point of view, most of us make cooler backstories than we make front stories. And you play the backstory. But I had not iterated enough, and I had to stand there, and I was pretty rookie at this point. I had to stand there and take the embarrassment of 5 people having Todd tell me he didn't even want to hear my idea. Didn't even want to hear it, because this other thing was where he wanted to go. And ultimately he was right. It was a lot cooler. But, you know, that was hard. You know, I cannot tell you that the blood didn't drain from my body and into my feet when he said that, because it happens. I think we're at the time. Okay, you've been an amazing audience. I'll be up here for a while to answer questions. But thank you so much.